Ethan Calloway stood motionless beside the tall window of his mother's bedroom, watching the morning light spill across the perfectly trimmed hedges of the Calloway estate. The lawns stretched endlessly, disciplined and immaculate, bordered by ancient oak trees that had witnessed generations rise and fall without ever caring. They swayed gently in the breeze, indifferent to the quiet tragedy unfolding inside the room. Ethan's charcoal suit was tailored to perfection. Not a single crease disturbed the fabric. A platinum watch rested against his wrist, its weight a silent reminder of boardrooms, contracts, and influence. It was worth more than most people earned in a year. None of it mattered. Behind him, Eleanor Calloway sat slumped in her wheelchair, her fragile body wrapped in layers of soft blankets as though the house itself was trying, and failing, to keep her warm. At 84, she was a shadow of the woman who had once filled these halls with life. There had been a time when she woke before sunrise to tend her roses, when her laughter drifted through open windows, when neighbors knocked on the door knowing they would leave with a slice of pie and a feeling of being cared for. That woman felt impossibly far away now. Her silver hair, once brushed with pride and precision, hung thin and lifeless around her weathered face. Her hands, gnarled by time and arthritis, trembled endlessly in her lap. Her eyes stared forward, unfocused, past the walls, past the present, as though she were looking through years no one else could see. "Mother, you need to eat something." Ethan's voice betrayed him, tight, frayed. He turned to face her, searching, always searching, for even the faintest sign that she was still there. There was none. Eleanor didn't respond. She didn't blink. It was as if the words had dissolved before ever reaching her. From the doorway, Lillian shifted her weight, irritation carefully masked behind elegance. She wore a midnight blue gown, her makeup flawless, her posture immaculate. They were already late for the charity gala, another night of rehearsed concern, polite smiles and conversations that meant nothing. "The nurse will be here any minute," she said softly, though the impatience underneath was unmistakable. "We really should go." Ethan nodded, guilt tightening his chest like a slow vice. He had done everything right. The best nurses rotated through the house. Physical therapists arrived faithfully. Nutritionists planned every meal with scientific precision. And yet, his mother continued to fade. As they turned to leave, Ethan paused in the doorway and looked back one last time. Eleanor hadn't noticed they were gone, and for the first time, he wondered if she ever would again. Desperation finally broke through Ethan's pride. The reports had grown steadily worse, each one heavier than the last. Eleanor was refusing meals entirely now, pushing plates away with trembling hands or leaving the food untouched until it grew cold. She spoke only when absolutely necessary, and even then her words were thin, fragile, as though they cost her something to release. Most days, she sat for hours by the window, eyes fixed on nothing, her body present while her mind seemed to drift somewhere far beyond reach. One doctor called it severe depression. Another mentioned dementia, lowering his voice as if the word itself might cause further damage. Ethan nodded through every explanation, every medical term, every proposed adjustment to medication. But inside, something was breaking. For the first time in his life, Ethan Calloway felt truly powerless. Money had always been the solution. Influence, access, resources. He had relied on them without question. Now none of it mattered. Money couldn't fix this. That was when Sofia Alvarez arrived. She was 49, with kind, observant eyes and a presence so calm it seemed to steady the air around her. She entered through the service entrance, carrying a worn canvas bag filled with cleaning supplies. According to the agency, she was only a temporary replacement for the regular housekeeper. Nothing more. No special training. No impressive credentials. Yet the moment Sofia stepped into the house, she noticed something no one else had. Not the polished marble floors that reflected the light like glass. Not the priceless artwork lining the walls. Not the chandeliers hanging overhead like frozen constellations. She noticed Eleanor. The elderly woman sat alone near the garden window, her small frame nearly disappearing into the vastness of the room. Silence clung to her like a second skin. In a house filled with beauty and wealth, loneliness had found its deepest home. "Good morning," Sofia said gently, approaching without hurry. A warm, genuine smile softened her face. "My name is Sofia. I'll be helping around the house for a little while." Eleanor's eyes shifted toward her just briefly before drifting away again. Sofia didn't force conversation. She didn't demand attention. She simply began her work. As she dusted shelves and straightened curtains, she spoke softly, not directly to Eleanor but close enough to be heard. Small things. The way the sunlight warmed the room, the birds gathering in the garden, the roses beginning to bloom. Eleanor remained silent. But Sofia noticed something others would have missed. Eleanor was no longer staring into nothing. She was listening. The next day, Sofia brought something different. There was no announcement, no explanation. As she moved through the room, wiping down surfaces and folding freshly laundered linens, she began to hum. The sound was soft at first, almost unintentional, like a thought spoken aloud without meaning to be heard. It was an old melody, simple, gentle, the kind of song passed quietly from one generation to the next. A song sung in kitchens while bread rose and hands worked, while children played on the floor, while life moved forward without anyone realizing how precious those moments were. It was the same song Sofia's own mother had sung while cooking, while folding laundry, while standing at the sink late at night when the house had finally grown quiet. Sofia hadn't thought about it in years. Eleanor's head turned, just slightly, barely noticeable. Sofia stopped humming. She looked over and saw Eleanor's eyes had shifted, no longer fixed on the empty distance beyond the window. They were unfocused, yes, but searching. "My mother used to sing that song," Sofia said softly, more to the memory than to the moment. "I heard it so often growing up, I never realized how much of it stayed with me." She hesitated, then glanced toward Eleanor. "Do you like music, Mrs. Calloway?" For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then, for the first time in weeks, Eleanor spoke. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, thin and rusted from disuse, as if the words had been locked away for far too long. "My mother sang too." The sound of it sent a quiet ache through Sofia's chest. "I'd forgotten," Eleanor added, her eyes lowering as though the memory surprised her. Sofia set the cloth down and pulled a chair closer. She didn't tower over Eleanor. She didn't rush. She sat, lowering herself until they were eye to eye. "What did she sing?" Sofia asked gently. Something shifted, like a door cracking open after years of being shut. Over the next hour, Eleanor spoke in fragments, short sentences, pauses filled with breath and memory. She talked about early mornings, about warm kitchens and flour-dusted counters, about melodies carried through rooms that no longer existed. Her voice grew steadier as the minutes passed. Sofia listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't glance at the clock. She didn't hurry the words. When Ethan came home that evening, he stopped in the doorway, uncertain he was seeing things. His mother was talking, not out of obligation, not in confusion, really talking. And for the first time in months, there was color in her face. Days became weeks. There were no sudden breakthroughs, no dramatic turning points, no moments that could be labeled a miracle in the way people usually mean it. Sofia didn't change medications. She didn't alter treatment plans or speak in medical language. She didn't claim to understand what the doctors could not. She did something far simpler. She saw Eleanor, not as a diagnosis, not as a responsibility, not as a problem waiting to be solved, but as a person. Sofia learned that Eleanor had once been a gifted gardener, someone who could coax life from stubborn soil. So on warm mornings, she wheeled her outside, stopping often, never rushing. She described each flower as though introducing an old friend. The deep reds of the roses, the soft whites of the jasmine, the way sunlight caught on green leaves. Sometimes, she placed a single petal into Eleanor's trembling hand, letting her feel its softness between her fingers. Eleanor rarely spoke during those moments, but she smiled. Sofia also discovered that Eleanor had loved to bake. Not for recognition, not for perfection, but for the simple joy of it. So she brought out flour and sugar, measuring carefully, guiding Eleanor's shaking hands with patience that never faltered. The kitchen filled with familiar scents. The results were uneven, misshapen, far from flawless, and somehow they were beautiful. Most importantly, Sofia gave Eleanor her time, not scheduled time, not monitored time, real time. She sat beside her without distraction, without checking her phone or glancing at the clock. She spoke about her own life, her 3 grown children finding their way in the world, her grandson struggling through his first guitar lessons. She laughed easily, inviting warmth into rooms that had grown cold. And she asked Eleanor questions, not polite questions, not obligatory ones. She asked for advice. She asked what Eleanor would have done differently. She asked what mattered most when everything else faded away. In doing so, she treated Eleanor not as someone to be managed, but as a woman who still had wisdom worth hearing. Something began to shift. It happened slowly, almost invisibly. Eleanor's posture straightened. Her eyes lingered longer on faces. Her silence became thoughtful instead of empty. Laughter, quiet and uncertain at first, returned in small, unexpected moments. No one could point to the exact moment it happened, but over time it became undeniable. Eleanor was coming back, not because her body was stronger, but because she had been reminded she still mattered. Lillian noticed first. It wasn't something dramatic, no sudden declaration, no medical report. It was a small thing, said almost in disbelief as she stood in the kitchen one evening. "She's eating," Lillian told Ethan, her voice low, uncertain. She finished her plate. She asked for seconds. Ethan looked up sharply, and Lillian hesitated, then shook her head as if the detail still didn't make sense. She was humming. That night, Ethan barely slept. The next morning, he went to his mother's room earlier than usual. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that once felt heavy but now carried something different, anticipation perhaps. He paused outside the door before opening it, unsure of what he would find. Eleanor was sitting upright in her chair. Her hair was brushed and pinned back neatly, the way she used to wear it years ago. Sunlight filtered through the window, resting gently on her face. Color, real color, had returned to her cheeks. Sofia sat beside her, holding a worn book of poetry, its spine creased from years of use. It was Eleanor's favorite, a collection she had loved long before illness had stolen her attention. Sofia's voice was calm and steady as she read, allowing each line to settle into the room. Eleanor listened, her eyes focused, her hands resting peacefully in her lap. "Ethan," she said suddenly. Her voice was steady, clear. He froze. Eleanor turned toward him, recognition unmistakable in her gaze. "Come sit with us," she said gently. "Sofia is reading the most beautiful poem." Ethan crossed the room slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter if he moved too fast. He sat beside them, the chair creaking softly beneath his weight. For the next few minutes, he didn't speak. He simply listened. Listened to the poetry. Listened to his mother's quiet breaths. Listened to the sound of life returning to a room he had nearly given up on. When Sofia reached the end of the poem, Eleanor smiled and commented on a line she remembered from years before. She laughed softly at something Sofia said in reply. Ethan lowered his head, pressing his fingers against his eyes. For the first time in months, the tears came, not from grief, but from relief. His mother was still there, and somehow, against all odds, she had found her way back. The truth later that afternoon, after Eleanor had grown tired and Sofia helped settle her comfortably in bed, Ethan stepped into the hallway. He hesitated, then followed Sofia as she carried a basket of folded linens toward the laundry room. "Sofia," he said, stopping her. She turned, calm as always. "What did you do?" Ethan asked. His voice was low, unsteady despite his effort to control it. "The doctors, the nurses, the therapists, we tried everything." Sofia considered him for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. Then she smiled, small and gentle, as though the answer were simpler than the question deserved. "I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. Ethan frowned. He had expected explanations, techniques, strategies, something he could understand and measure, something that made sense in a world where effort always produced results. Instead, Sofia continued, "I just remembered she's still a person." The words landed with unexpected weight. Ethan felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. In an instant, images rushed through his mind. Checklists, schedules, consultations, carefully planned care meetings. Endless conversations about Eleanor that never truly included her. He had spoken about his mother more than he had spoken to her. Sofia shifted the basket in her arms. "She has memories," she said. "She has things she loves, songs, stories, moments that still matter to her." When people get older, everyone becomes so focused on keeping them safe that they forget to keep them seen. Ethan looked away, swallowing hard. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said quietly. "You were," Sofia replied gently. "You were taking care of her, but sometimes care isn't enough." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes we don't need to fix anything. We just need to be there, to listen, to sit beside someone and remind them they still belong in this world." Ethan leaned against the wall, his polished exterior cracking in a way it never had before. For the first time, he understood what had been missing, not in Eleanor's treatment but in his own presence. He had been so busy managing his mother's life that he had forgotten to share it with her. The truth settled over him quietly, but it was devastating. Love didn't require solutions. It required attention. And in realizing that, Ethan understood something else just as clearly. He had almost lost his mother not to illness but to silence. From that day on, Ethan changed. Not in a way that could be measured or announced. There were no grand promises or dramatic gestures. The change revealed itself slowly, in choices that seemed small to anyone watching from the outside. He began visiting his mother every morning, not to review reports, not to ask the nurses questions, not to manage her care. He came simply to sit with her. They drank coffee together in the soft light of early morning. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Ethan learned that silence didn't always need to be filled. Often, it was enough just to be there, to listen when Eleanor felt like speaking, and to stay when she didn't. On weekends, Lillian joined them. At first, the visits felt tentative, almost awkward. But over time, Eleanor began to share stories neither of them had ever heard. Stories of her youth, of mistakes made and lessons learned, of dreams she once held quietly to herself. Wisdom surfaced in unexpected moments, the kind that doesn't come from books or success, but from living a long, imperfect life. They realized how close they had come to losing all of it. 6 months later, Ethan stood at the same window where he had once felt only helplessness. Now, he watched something different. In the garden below, Eleanor stood carefully on her feet, leaning on Sofia's arm. They moved slowly, deliberately, stopping beside a rose bush heavy with bloom. Eleanor bent forward, inhaling its scent as though committing it to memory. "I'd forgotten how beautiful they are," she said, her voice steady and full. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not pain this time, but gratitude. That evening, he asked Sofia to join them for dinner. The table felt warmer than it ever had before, filled not with formality but with quiet understanding. "You gave me back my mother," Ethan said sincerely, meeting her eyes. Sofia shook her head, her smile gentle but certain. "She was always there," she replied. "She just needed space to be herself again." Eleanor reached across the table then, placing her hand over Ethan's and Sofia's, her grip trembling but sure. In that moment, Ethan understood the change wasn't just in his mother. It was in all of them. They had learned that presence mattered more than control, and that love, when finally given the time it deserves, has a way of bringing people back to life. On warm afternoons, when the sun poured golden light across the garden, they would gather there. Eleanor in her wheelchair, Sofia at her side, Ethan leaning back in a wooden chair, hands resting loosely in his lap. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. The air was filled with quiet, soft, unhurried, and profoundly alive. An elderly woman who had once been a force of life and love. A housekeeper who had quietly remembered how to see her. A businessman who had learned the lesson wealth could never teach. Together, they shared something far more valuable than money or status. They shared humanity. The garden became a sanctuary, not because it was large or meticulously maintained, but because it was alive with attention. Birds darted through the branches. Bees hovered over the flowers. Sunlight dappled Eleanor's hair, catching the silver threads and making them glow. Sofia would point out a new bloom or describe the scent of a rose. Eleanor would reach for it, her fingers brushing the petals, feeling life in a way she had nearly forgotten. Sometimes, Eleanor would laugh, a soft, melodic sound that hadn't been heard in months. She would recall old stories, forgotten lessons, and small victories from her past. She spoke of love, of mistakes, of joy and sorrow mingled together in ways only a long life can teach. Ethan listened, not as a son trying to guide or fix, not as a caretaker making sure nothing went wrong. He simply listened. Lillian sometimes joined them, her presence quieter now, less concerned with schedules or appearances, more focused on being part of this fragile, beautiful moment. And Eleanor, watching them, would smile. "The impossible thing," she said one afternoon, her voice clear and warm, "isn't that I got better, it's that you all remembered how to care." Her words hung in the air, heavier than any diagnosis or medical report. They carried a truth no prescription could convey. And in that garden, surrounded by flowers, sunlight, and gentle voices, it became clear. Care, presence, and love, simple, human, unhurried, were more powerful than wealth, more healing than any medicine, more lasting than any legacy. And that, Eleanor knew, that made all the difference. On those afternoons, the impossible became ordinary, and in ordinary moments, life returned.